The first step is to modify the activity main XML layout so that the app looks something like this. Let's go into Android Studio and look at that file. Here's our activity main XML layout file, and we have the preview on the device showing up on the right-hand side here. I can click on this magnifying glass to zoom in to the device. There, that's better now. To build the desired layout, I want to first add a plus button in between the quantity header and the quantity value. We already have a button in our layout, which is for the order button down here. So I can just copy this code. And then I'm going to paste it in between the quantity header and the quantity value. Now I see the button appearing in the right place, but I need to change the text so that it says plus instead of order. Cool. And I'm also going to remove the margin top because we already have 16 dips of margin from the bottom of this text view. So go ahead and delete this. The button is pretty big, and in the quiz we asked you to change the size of it to be 48 dips tall and 48 dips wide. So I'm going to edit the button XML here. Nice, now it's the right size. Now I can copy this XML and paste it below the quantity value so that we have the minus button. I deleted the white space because according to the Android code style guidelines, you shouldn't have extra white spaces in your code. Now I'm going to change the text of this button so that it says minus. It already has 48 dips width and height. Now the plus and minus buttons are in place. We mentioned earlier that we also want the initial quantity to be 2 and the initial price to be $10. So let's make that change now. This is what our layout looks like so far. Let's go back to the quiz image to check on our progress. We've successfully changed the layout, but we also need to modify the plus button so that when it's clicked, it calls the increment method, and when the minus button is clicked, we need to call the decrement method. Back in Android Studio, I'm going to modify the plus button so that the value of the Android onClick attribute is increment. That way, when the plus button is clicked on, it will call a method called increment in the main activity. Similarly, for the minus button, I'm going to modify the onClick attribute so that the value is decrement. I'm going to save this and then run this on the device. The layout looks good, but if I hit the plus button, then it crashes. Do you remember how I showed you to look at the logs for the stack trace of the error? The logs are already open by default, so let's drag this arrow up so that we can see more of the message. If we scroll up, we see that this is our error. This is our app, just Java, and it says illegal state exception. If I scroll to the right, I can see more of the error message. The error message says, could not find a method increment in the activity main activity. This looks very similar to the error that we had in the previous video. Basically, there's no method called increment in the main activity. And that's actually expected because we didn't make that change yet. For the second step, we're supposed to add an increment method to the main activity, create a quantity variable that's initialized to 3, and then also display the quantity. To do this, I open up the main activity Java file. Hooking up the behavior for the plus button is going to be very similar to how we hooked up the behavior for the order button. So let's copy this method here that handles the order button. Immediately, I get an error that says submit order is already defined in the main activity. You can't have two methods that are exactly the same in the main activity. But that's okay because we're going to change this to be the increment method anyways. And now the error goes away. I'm going to modify the comment because now this is a new method. I'm going to update the comment to refer to the plus button instead of the order button. Within the increment method, I'm going to create an integer quantity variable. I'm going to initialize it to a value of 3 as the quiz requested. Then I can display this quantity to the screen. I don't need to update price in this method, so I can delete that line of code. That looks good, so let's test this now. Now when I click on the plus button, it actually updates to 3. That's pretty cool. But if I hit the minus button, then it crashes. Let's check the logs. I'm going to scroll to the bottom to get the most recent logs and then scroll upwards to see the last error. For our app, there was an illegal state exception because it couldn't find the method decrement in our activity. This is also expected because we didn't add the decrement method yet. Let's go ahead and do that now. I'm going to copy this method and then paste it below it. I'm going to rename this to decrement. Now this comment needs to be updated. This method is called when the minus button is clicked. To figure out what we're supposed to do within this method, let's go back to the quiz. We've finished 2 steps so far. The last step is for the decrement method in the main activity. We want to create a quantity variable and initialize it to 1. Then we're going to display the quantity to the screen. In the decrement method, we've created an integer quantity variable. I'm going to initialize it to a value of 1 and then display that quantity to the screen. Now let's run it on our device. Okay, cross your fingers that it doesn't crash this time. If I hit the minus button, then yay, it decreases to 1. If I hit the plus button, it increases to 3. So these buttons are working as expected, at least for this stage of our app. Ideally, as I mentioned earlier, we want this to increase to 4, 5, 6, and we want this to decrease to 2, 1, 0, but that will come at a later stage in the lesson. Great job so far.